Hello everybody, my name is Jackie and welcome to Prairie Sports Talk, the podcast where we talk about sports that directly impact the Canadian Prairie. Today is Tuesday, February 13th, 2024, and welcome to the CFL Free Agency Frenzy. We got a lot to talk about today. I'm going to be recapping the legal tampering window period in the CFL. I'm going to be talking about what each team did. I'm going to be talking about what the teams didn't do, who they gained, who they lost, who they managed to keep. I'm going to be giving a winner and a loser for both the Eastern Division and the Western Division. We got a lot to talk about today. Let's get into it. And just before we actually begin, I just want to mention that all my information today on who has been re-signed and who's been released and that sort of stuff all comes from a tremendous article on 3 Down Nation. The article has been linked down below, but let's get on to the BC Lions. They re-signed a bunch of people, namely 2 major receivers. Javon Kotori, I apologize if I mispronounced that name, and Keon Hatchell. 2 very skilled receivers who have a very bright future in the league. I think it makes a lot of sense for BC to want to bring these 2 back, especially because they have lost Dominic Rhymes. So I think this is a very good decision for them to bring them back. But most notably, they have signed former Montreal Alouette running back William Stanback. Now Stanback, he's had a little bit of a quiet season the last couple of years, but that's mostly due to injuries. I don't think Stanback has lost a step yet, but that doesn't mean the Lions aren't taking a mild risk on this. Because running backs, when they get into their 30s like William Stanback has, at any point they could just suddenly drop off without warning. Now I don't think that's going to happen with Stanback yet this season. I've seen a lot of positive things from him, especially last season in the Grey Cup. He was able to do his job. He was a part of why the Alouettes were able to win the Cup. So I think William Stanback signing BC is very beneficial for both teams. BC already has a tremendous roster, and they were one of the biggest surprises in the CFL last season. I didn't expect them to be half as good as they were. I really expected them to take a massive step back after they lost both Burnham and Rourke in the same offseason. But Vernon Adams came in and he just had a tremendous season, and I don't see any reason we shouldn't expect more of the same from him. I think their receiving core is going to be a big part of their success this season. So Kotori and Hatchell are both very big signings for them. Dominic Rhymes is going to be someone who's very hard to replace, and he's a very skilled receiver. He's not exactly someone you can ever fully replace, but that doesn't mean you can't almost like moneyball it. So you just find a group of receivers who can get the same stats he was able to, and see if they together can replicate the success that he's able to produce on his own. I think on the whole, the Lions receiving core takes a step back this season, but the rush game takes a major step forward. And I think between VA and Stanback in the backfield, that is going to be a very intimidating 1-2 punch to line up against, because you either got the big arm of big play VA, or you've got the dangerous power of William Stanback. Now, on to the Edmonton Elks, a team that I feel needed to make some major moves this offseason if they want to even be semi-competitive next season. So what have they done? So the most notable re-signing is Kyran Moore. I'm very high on him. I think he's a tremendous player. He's one of the fastest receivers in the league. He's very elusive. He runs routes very sharply, and I think any team that has him is better with him on their roster. He makes every single roster in the league better just by being on it. As for their additions, now this is where the big news comes from. They added 2 major names. They added McLeod Bethel Thompson, who they signed after a brief stint in the USFL before it turned into the UFL. And they have also they also made a trade for Curly Gittings Jr. from Toronto. Those are two very, very, very big moves. But like I said in the video where I talked about what I thought of the Bethel Thompson sign-in for Edmonton, I don't think they needed to. I don't think they needed to make a sign-in for a quarterback and splash big money his way. They have Trey Ford on the roster still. Trey Ford is the future of Canadian football. That is not a question. That is a statement. That is a prophecy. That is a promise. But the future has to wait. Because there is no way that Chris Jones actually gives him a shot this season. Which is very upsetting because Edmonton was a lot better of a team last season when Trey Ford was on the field. Now, fortunately, Cornelius isn't going to be on the roster this season. I'm not saying there isn't a place for him in the CFL. I'm just saying he's not a starting quarterback. I think eventually, sooner or later, he will find a home somewhere in the league, maybe in the UFL, as a short yardage quarterback. But he's not a starter. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. Short yardage is a very important part of the game. It keeps drives alive. And if you can't be successful on second and short and third and short, you're not going to be successful in the CFL. So I think Taylor Cornelius will find a home. But I'm still confused as to why Edmonton went so hard after Bethel Thompson when they have Trey Ford. Now, I know Bethel Thompson's a lot more experienced. I know he can come in and mentor Ford. But I don't think Ford needs the mentorship now. I think he's ready to take the next step in his game and become the superstar that everyone seems to think he can be. Now, I've heard from various reporters that there is somewhat of a discrepancy between how coaches and league management see Trey Ford and how the fans see him. But that's something I just don't fully understand because Trey Ford has shown a lot of promise, in my opinion. He has shown a lot of talent. And I have yet to see a major downside. Maybe he needs to become a little more comfortable in the pocket and be a little more patient before just deciding to take off and run down the field. But I feel like that's something you learn not by watching a player like Bethel Thompson. That's something that you learn from being in the game and learning how to read those situations. We saw that growth from Fajardo when he was in Saskatchewan and transitioning into his time in Montreal. Because, yes, Fajardo's a lot more pocket-centric than he was in Saskatchewan, but he still uses his legs, and I think that's kind of what you gotta look for from Trey Ford. So, taking him off the field for in exchange for a veteran quarterback who's maybe going to be around for 2-3 seasons at most is a very questionable move. I think teams should be trying to make a trade for Trey Ford, but I also said that in the video where I mentioned that Bethel Thompson was signed, and I'm starting to wonder if I was a little off the mark with that by saying teams would be very excited to try and make a trade for him. But I think on the whole, Edmonton's roster got a little better. Not a lot, but definitely noticeable. I think they will maybe be a 4 to 6 win team next season. Now, very expectedly, or at least expectedly in my opinion, the Calgary Stampeders are trying to keep the status quo. Now, I think Calgary had a very rough shake last season. They struggled last year, but I don't think that's necessarily the fault of any of the players. I don't think that's the fault of the coaching staff or management. I think that sometimes teams just don't perform up to what they should be able to for various different reasons, whether that's just the fumbles bouncing away from them, the wind catching the ball in the air and blowing it past the receiver, or various different things. I saw a lot of that for Calgary last season. I'm not saying they lost because of bad luck. I'm basically just saying they lost because of circumstances outside of their control. So it's not very surprising to me that they didn't add a lot of people, and in fact they re-signed a lot of players. Now, I'm not gonna go through all these players, but I think the biggest thing that they were able to do this offseason was re-sign Michael Alway, because Micah Alway, in my opinion, is one of the best linebackers in the CFL, but he needs to keep his nose clean. When he's not getting unnecessary fines and suspensions or unnecessary penalties, he's terrorizing quarterbacks. He is giving running backs panic attacks. This man is disturbingly good. And let's just say, there was a reason I think his last name is the first 3 letters of awesome. Because that is how he plays. He leaves everyone in awe. As for what they have added, they didn't really do much. They added Matthew Shields. He's not a bad backup. I'm a little shocked that Hamilton didn't re-sign him, given Bull's injury history. But we'll get into Hamilton a little later. And then they also signed Trayvon Tate and Ricky Walker. It's never bad to add some depth to your offensive and defensive lines. But here's the big thing. Demario Houston has signed in Calgary. One of the best defensive players in the league, in my opinion. Demario Houston, he's going to bring another level of fire to Calgary's defense. A defense that I just feel like is 1 or 2 steps away from becoming an elite force in the CFL. I feel like if Calgary's defense can produce next season, it won't matter how good or bad the offense is, because teams won't be scoring enough against them for it to really matter. I think with Alway terrorizing quarterbacks and Houston in the defensive backfield, that's really going to make a difference for Calgary. And I'm very curious and very excited to see how this turns out for them. I think they've got a very skilled young quarterback in Jake Mayo, who, like a lot of Calgary Stampeders, is just coming off a little bit of an off season. I think Calgary is going to be a lot better next season. Alrighty, on to the big one. On to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the most busy team in the legal tampering window. We saw the Corey Mace effect in full effect. So the Riders re-signed a load of players. Notable re-signings include Mason Fine, Mario Alfred, Braden Lanius, Sean Bain Jr., Micah Johnson, Anthony Lanier, Nelson Lacombo, Godfrey Onyeka, Jogan Huss, Brett Lawler, and a lot more. It's a really, really impressive list of names. And then here is the big splash the Roughriders made. They agreed to terms with AJ Ouellette, Jamarcus Hardrick, Malik Coney, Jamil Thurman, and Jalen Edwards-Cooper. They were busy. They were really busy. And if you guys remember, I predicted the Roughriders would sign AJ Ouellette. I was right. I knew it. However, I did not expect them to go after Hardrick. I really expected him to retire this season, if I'm being completely honest. But I'm not saying it's a bad signing. I actually really like this signing. Jamarcus Hardrick can come in, and I think he should be a starter on this team. But worst case scenario, if he has taken a step back this season for whatever reason, he can show up and he can still mentor the young linemen such as Logan Folland. I think when you get a really experienced and very skilled lineman like Hardrick, he's not just there to play. He's there to almost be an on-field coach and help teach the younger players in similar positions how to hold their own. Folland took a really big step forward last season, and I'm very excited to see how he's going to excel with Jamarcus Hardrick teaching him. And then, of course, AJ Ouellette. Oh my god, it still doesn't feel real that the Roughriders have managed to sign him. Thor has come to the prairies. This is going to be special. There are very few places and very few players who matched up so perfectly like Saskatchewan and Ouellette. Ouellette already looks like he comes from Saskatchewan. I'm not saying that's an insult. I'm saying he just does. AJ Ouellette loves the game of football almost as much as the province of Saskatchewan does. And the only reason I say almost as much is I don't think there is a single person in the world who loves football as much as the province of Saskatchewan collectively does. This is a match made in heaven. AJ Ouellette is joining his former coach, Cody Mace, and this is really big. AJ Ouellette had over 2,000 rushing yards last season. The Riders gave up Jamal Morrow, which is very, very unfortunate. I really like him, but AJ Ouellette is a step forward. I don't care who you had in that backfield last season. It's a step forward when you can pick up somebody coming off a 2,000 rushing yard season. I think the Riders have really increased the rate of their rebuild. In fact, I think this year, I'm not sure if the Riders are cup contenders yet, but I'd say the Riders can definitely make some noise in the playoffs, assuming the team can gel. That is my one big fear when a team makes so many major moves. I think the Saskatchewan Roughriders have a real shot to be a very, very special team next season. I'm sorry to say, Bomber fans, but I think the end of your tremendous run is coming. Players are starting to retire. You're losing players to other teams as well. Your players are starting to get old. The end is coming. If it's not here this season, it will be here very soon. Now, if I was the Winnipeg GM, I'd be trying to trade some of the older players who still have a lot of value, but could theoretically drop off at any moment. I'd be trying to trade those players for younger players. Instead, they're re-signing the players. I think this is a mistake. Now, I'm not saying re-signing these players is necessarily a bad thing, but I think we're going to see a lot of signs this year of the team taking a step back. Now, Oliveira, tremendous re-signing for the team, as is re-signing Wolotowski and Dalton Schoen. As well as Willie Jefferson. That man is the heart and soul of the Winnipeg defense. But he's getting up there. Oliveira, Schoen, and Wolotowski, still relatively young. They got some time in the CFL yet. But Jefferson, I'll be shocked if he's still around in 2025. I really will be. And they didn't really add a lot of people. They actually didn't agree to terms with anyone. The only players they added are Chris Strevlo and Noah Hallett? I don't know how to pronounce that name. I apologize. Strevlo, that's major. He's a backup still, but he has a lot of energy. He's a fan favorite. That's going to move a lot of merchandise and bring a lot of money into the team. Now, I know that's not necessarily why they signed him. They signed him because his throwing has gotten a lot better through his stint in the NFL, and he's still incredibly hard to bring down. And it's going to be very scary for a lot of teams to go up against the 1-2 punch of Zach Collaros and Chris Strevlo again. But I think Winnipeg's going to take a step back this season. Now, I'm not saying they won't make the playoffs. I'm not saying they won't be a good team. I'm just saying, if you're expecting to see the Bombers that we've seen the last couple seasons, you might be in for a little bit of a rude awakening. Now, if I'm wrong, you can call me on that. I will admit when I'm wrong. I'm an adult. I will admit it. But I really do think the Bombers are going to take a step back this season because they are trying to squeeze every ounce of production out of these players instead of trying to move them for players who can still give the team a lot. So, on to the Ticats. They didn't necessarily sign and agree to terms with a lot of people, but they brought back the players who helped them a lot last season, and they did bring in one new player who I think will make a very positive impact on the defense. I feel like signing Jamal Peters is a really good move for Hamilton. They're picking up a very skilled defensive back, someone who who I think is one of the better defensive backs in the league. Not necessarily say the best, but he's right on the cusp of being one of the best, if that makes any sense. I feel like these moves by Hamilton, they flew under the radar for a lot of people, but I feel like they're still very good moves. Like I said, they brought back players who were successful last season. Namely, they brought back their kickers, Legio and Redvik. I feel like that's always a good thing to do when your kickers are semi-successful. So I feel like that can help them convert on points if they can't necessarily get a touchdown. The kickers can come in and either bomb the ball way down deep, or they could come in, kick a field goal, and at least you escape with 3 points. Every point matters. You gotta take the points when you have the opportunity. I think Hamilton, they could have been a little more aggressive. I feel like they really needed to make a splash, but at the same time, I think they did enough to at least be a semi-respectable team next season. So there's that. So let's see. We got Toronto next. Not a lot happened. It's not like they lost a lot of their best players or anything. Not like they lost defensive coordinator to Saskatchewan. They still definitely have their superstar running back returning. They definitely still have their nearly unstoppable team returning, right? No, they don't. They lost a lot of players. Now, they did bring back a decent amount, but a lot of them were either depth players or players in positions that are important, but not necessarily what people would call an impact position. Like an offensive line, very important. So getting a good player in that position, it's very important. But when you lose someone like AJ Ouellette, when you lose your best player, well, arguably best players between him and Chad Kelly from last season, when you lose that, you need to try and replace him. Who do the Argos have at running back now? There are a lot of running backs who are free agents this season. Why haven't the Argos gone after, say, Kadeem Carey? Why haven't they gone after, say, Jamal Morrow? It's confusing. I feel like the Argos just kind of fell asleep at the wheel and were like, we'll bring everyone back. We got this. And then none of their players actually came back. I feel like the Argos are going to take a massive step back this season. I feel like they're still going to be a decent team. I'd say probably right around the 500 mark, but it's not going to be the nearly unstoppable team we saw last season. Now, on to the only team that was as active, if not more active, than the Roughriders. On to the Ottawa Redblacks. This was a surprisingly active window for them. I expected the Redblacks to not be overly active in this window, and maybe as we got to the CFL draft, they'd be trying to trade some of their older players for high round draft picks. But it seems like Ottawa's gearing up to try and at least put together a semi-respectable team this season. They brought back a lot of players who were effective last season. Most notably, Raylan Addison. He's a very skilled player. I think he has a lot more in him yet, and we've seen what he can do in the past. He didn't quite have the stats last season, but I think he was injured last season. I could be wrong. If I am, please correct me. But they made some splashes. They picked up Dominic Grimes from BC, so that's a tremendous weapon to have. So you're going to have a really nice 1-2 punch in your receiving core with Dominic Grimes and Raylan Addison on the other side. Or at least potentially on the other side. I don't know, maybe sometimes they might try and find a way to get them to line up on the same side. I don't know, there's a lot of different things you can do when you have two receivers of that caliber. And as I was going to say next, they did pick up a really solid quarterback in Drew Brown from Winnipeg. Now, I think that's a trade that makes a lot of sense. Mazzoli, I'm not sure if he'll be ready to go in time for the regular season. Worst case scenario, they can start Drew Brown, who the league consensus seems to be he's ready to take that next step into a starting quarterback role. And even if he's not the starter for the majority of the season next year, he'll be underneath another very successful quarterback in Jeremiah Mazzoli. So he will have learned under players such as Zach Klaus and Jeremiah Mazzoli. Now those are two very good quarterbacks that you'd be very lucky to learn from. So I think a few additions to the offense for Ottawa is a very good move. They also picked up Darius Bladdock from Toronto. But other than that, they didn't do a whole lot. They released some players, most notably Nate Bahal, but I still feel like Ottawa did enough that they can maybe put up a fight in the East and maybe, just maybe, squeak into the playoffs, likely as the third seat in the East. But it would be pretty close. I feel like Ottawa, though, definitely does have a better team than they did last season. And finally, on to the defending champion Montreal Alouettes. Unsurprisingly, Montreal didn't really add a lot of people, and they didn't really let go of a lot of people. They let go of some players, and they added some, but it's going to be more of the same in Montreal this season. So some notable moves they made. They extended Antwi, they extended Sean Lemon, Darnell Sankey. Then they also added Tevin Jones, which is likely coming in to replace Anthony Mack. Austin Mack, who is headed down south to the NFL. Then they also added a couple defensive linemen. I'm not overly surprised that Montreal was relatively quiet compared to some other teams. I feel like it was the right thing to do. When you have a championship team, you don't want to mess with it too much, and the only time you really want to change it is when you absolutely have to. Now, changes may come down the pipeline if, say, for whatever reason, injuries happen or the team doesn't work out or anything like that. So it makes a lot of sense that they're trying to stick with the status quo, and I think it is the right thing to do. As for who I think the big winners and losers are of free agency, I think in the West, the winner unquestionably is the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They added a lot of skill and a lot of experience without really giving up too much. Yes, they lost players like Tevin Jones, who had a major impact last season, but they also picked up a player like Brady Oliveira, who, well, he had over 2,000 rushing yards last season. That's absolutely insane. As for the big loser in the West, I think it's the Blue Bombers. Yes, they kept a lot of the players around, but I think that's why they're the big loser. A lot of the players that they kept are at that age where at any given point they could suddenly fall off without much warning. So they did manage to keep some of their younger players like Sean, but you also got players like Willie Jefferson, who, yes, Willie is a tremendous player. He is a future Hall of Famer, but he's at that age where he could just wake up tomorrow and without anyone really realizing it, just not be as good. And that's nothing against him. He's a tremendous athlete. He's a tremendous player. But it's just, when you're at this level of football, age is your enemy. And the older you get, the harder it is to keep up with everyone else. And then in the East, I think the biggest winner is probably Hamilton. Hamilton, they were a relatively weaker team last season. Yes, they got into the playoffs, but their only competition for getting into the playoffs were the Roughriders. And the Riders, well, they were off bowling. They weren't going to get into the playoffs. So, but Hamilton, they didn't necessarily add big names, but they added skill in the positions that they needed to add it. They added some depth as well. I'm very curious to see how Hamilton's going to do this season. I think if Bo Levi stays healthy for them, they could be a force to be reckoned with in the East. And then the biggest loser in the East, I think it goes without saying, it's the Toronto Argonauts. They lost a lot of their key players, and they just haven't been able to agree to terms with players to replace them. And that's not me saying that it's easy to replace someone like AJ Ouellette. That's me saying that the Argos haven't gone after players to replace them. Why haven't they gone after Jamal Morrow? Why haven't they gone after Kadeem Carey? Why haven't they even tried to replace the players that they're about to lose today? But that is everything I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you are on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify, be sure to follow the 13th Man Podcast Network. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I will see you guys tomorrow for my normal episode. But for now, this is Jackie for Prairie Sports Talk signing off. Stay safe, stay strong, you got